Hey guys, how are we all? Welcome back to the Twist the Bones podcast. Thank you so much if you guys tuned in for last week's episode. I really appreciate it. I really enjoyed doing it and I cannot wait to get stuck into this episode this week. But if you didn't catch last week's episode, my name is Megan and I'm going to be sitting down reading and reacting to a bunch of sort of spooky, scary, horrifying ghost stories or real life encounter stories, all of that sort of jazz. But before I do get into this week's stories, I just want to quickly go over some housekeeping similar to last week. So firstly, I will always credit the people who wrote these stories, so all the information will be in the description, so links and things to the original creators if you guys want to go and support those content creators as well. And also, if you have your own scary story, so whether that be a sort of let's not meet stalker vibe story like you can read on Reddit, or if you have your own ghost paranormal experience encounter that you really want to share and you want it to feature in a future episode, please reach out and send your story over to me. I would love to read it out. You can do this either by heading over to our Facebook page, which is just Twist the Bones Podcast, or you can actually email it to twistthebonespod@gmail.com and I will go through those and hopefully read them in a future episode. But let's get into this week's stories. Similar to last week, I haven't read any of these, so this will be my first time reading and reacting to them, so hopefully these are good. But this one is from medium.com and it's The Escaped Man, and this is apparently by Lisa. The rain was falling heavily. It was like driving through a thick curtain of water. He eased off the accelerator a little bit. You had to be careful driving on wild nights like these. The last thing you'd want is to have an accident or a breakdown. You just want to be at home on these stormy nights. That thwack of the windscreen wipers was hypnotic. He stared out into the glow of the headlights. The rain sounded like white noise interference as it battered the car. He was reminded of the opening scenes of a Hitchhiker film. Through the wash of the rain, he spotted a figure at the side of the road. The person wore a green parka and had their thumb jerked out. Why on earth would anyone be hitchhiking tonight? Surely you would just stay put until the morning. They must have been in a rush to get where they were going. So he signalled down and pulled over, and the hitchhiker climbed in. He shut the door quickly, glad to be out of the rain, and he pulled his hood back inside. He was somewhere in his mid-20s and had wild red hair and a thick beard. "Awful night air," said the driver. The hitchhiker held his gaze for a long moment. Drops of rainwater trickled down his face. Yes, it is. The driver pulled out and continued through the storm, and the hitchhiker glanced over his shoulder into the blackness behind them. "You okay?" The hitchhiker simply nodded. They drove on in silence for a short while. The BBC radio phone and blaring out from the car's speakers filled in for conversation. They listened to the radio and their own thoughts as they moved on. "Where are you headed?" asked the driver. "North," the hitcher pointed out. "Are you travelling to visit friends?" The driver couldn't tell if that was a yes or a no. He adjusted his tie nervously, and the hitcher stared at him in his suit and tie. The hitcher seemed scruffy in comparison in his Parker and Pink Floyd t-shirt. "Do you work around here?" asked the hitcher. "Yes," said the driver. "I was stuck late at the office. You know how it is." "No, not really." And again they drifted into silence. The talk radio show carried on as they drove through the wind and the rain, and the hitcher shifted in his seat and stared out the windscreen. "No music?" the hitcher asked. "What? Is there no music we could listen to?" "I like the talk radio shows. I'm not really a fan of music." The hitcher's eyes glazed over for a moment. Then he spoke. "I like listening to music. It calms me down." The driver said nothing. Several miles later, there was a news bulletin on the radio, and the reporter tried to remain professional as she read the announcement. "We are getting reports that a patient has escaped from a Manchester psychiatric institution. The man is said to be psychopathic and is said to have a history of murder." The hitcher jabbed a finger on the button on the radio panel. Tiny pop music blared out from the speakers. The driver stared at his passenger, his question unasked. "I hate the news," answered the hitcher. "It's so depressing. Brings me down. There's never any good news, is there?" The driver did not reply. "Don't worry, I'm not the killer," said the hitcher, fidgeting with his coat. "No," said the driver. "I mean, no. Of course you aren't." Ooh, okay, so that is actually the end of that one. Ooh, that is interesting. And there is a link to actually find out the rest of it. So I have actually just read the short end to that story because it did stop there and it says click here to see how the story ends. I did guess right as to what I thought was happening in this situation, but it is a copyrighted story, so I am going to leave the link for you guys to finish that story off if you want, but if not, it is an exceptional cliffhanger right there. That was quite an interesting one. So our next one, we're going to head back over to the Scary for Kids website. I really enjoyed this website, and this story is called Vault Door. There was a boy who got a summer job working in a cemetery. It was not the type of work he would normally choose, but his dad was friends with the undertaker, and he'd convinced him to take the job despite his fear of dead bodies. It was a very eerie place to work, and after being there for over a week, the boy still got the creeps when he caught sight of a corpse. Luckily, he didn't have to get anywhere near the dead bodies though. His work consisted mainly of digging graves, sweeping, polishing and cutting grass. His boss, the undertaker, was the one who prepared the dead bodies for burial. The scariest things were the vaults. Families bought these large tombs, and every member of the family who died was placed inside the vault in a coffin. It creeped him out to think about all those bodies lying around inside the dusty chambers and secret rooms. But the boy gradually got used to working in the cemetery, and everything went well until one evening, the unthinkable happened. While he was inside one of the vaults, sweeping the floor and polishing the nameplates, a gust of wind blew the vault door shut. He realised, to his horror, that he was trapped in the crypt, surrounded by dead bodies and coffins, with no one to help him. His worst nightmare was coming true. He shouted and hollered, but it was to no use. The undertaker's house was too far away, and no one could hear him. And as the hours passed by, the desperate boy realised that he would have to rely on himself, and began trying to think of a way out. There was a small open window high up above the vault door. Unfortunately, it was much too high to reach. But looking around the tomb, he decided that he could use the coffins. If he stacked them up, one on top of the other, they could form a flight of steps. After stacking the coffins up against the door, the boy climbed up them, gingerly, taking care not to tip them over. Just when he thought his plan was working, he stepped on the top coffin, and the wood gave way under his weight. His foot went straight through the coffin lid, and he felt a sudden sharp pain in his leg. Crying out in agony, he could picture the splintered wood and rusty nails slicing into his skin. The stack of coffins began to wobble, and for one horrifying moment he thought he was going to lose his balance and tumble down to the stone floor. Luckily though, he managed to grab onto the window and steady himself. He could feel blood trickling down his leg. Despite the pain he was in, the boy pulled himself up and began shaking his leg to free himself from the coffin lid. The stack of coffins tipped over and clattered to the ground. Clinging to the window, the boy pulled with all his might and crawled through the narrow opening. He popped down on the outside and limped towards the undertaker's house to get help. The undertaker came out and found the poor boy lying on his doorstep, clutching his bleeding leg. So he carried the boy to his car and drove him straight to the hospital. After the doctor washed off all the blood, he began to examine the boy's wounds. "How did you get these injuries?" asked the doctor. "I got cut by some broken pieces of wood," said the boy. "But these aren't cuts," said the doctor. "They're human bite marks." Oh, that was a fun one. Don't know if I could work in a graveyard. As much as I find them fascinating and things, they are still creepy, and I don't know how I would feel about working in a graveyard, so kudos to him, I guess. So the next one is called The 13th Floor, and this is from mumlovesbest.com. If you live in or visit a building without a 13th floor, this story is an excellent way to explain why the number isn't used in the elevator. The first hotel to have more than 13 floors had a huge Halloween party to celebrate its opening. Each floor was set up like a maze, decorated with cobwebs and other Halloween decorations. There were lots of people dressed up as ghosts and ghouls to frighten the partygoers. An exciting prize was hidden on the top floor, and the first person to reach the prize would win it. Jack and Sophia were two of the partygoers. They worked their way easily through the mazes on the first few floors, and as they headed up through the building, the hallways on each floor got darker and scarier. When they got to the 12th floor, Jack and Sophia heard a blood-curdling scream, and as they made their way through the maze, they heard more screams and cries for help. Finally, in the lobby by the elevators, they saw blood dripping from the ceiling. The elevator dinged and the doors slowly opened, which was strange because every other time they used the elevator, the doors had been quick and smooth. The light in the elevator was flickering as they stepped in, and as the doors began to close, the lights went out completely. And then, screams so loud the entire building heard them began to ring out. At first, the partygoers thought it was part of the scary Halloween theme, but then the owners of the building turned on all the lights and asked everyone to return to the lobby. But when people tried to use the elevator, it never came. The bell would ding, but the doors wouldn't open, and they were all forced to use the stairs. Down in the lobby, the building owners explained that they had not played the sounds of the screams, and as they did a check of everyone who came back, they realised Jack and Sophia had not returned. Just then, the doors to the elevator opened. It was empty, except for Jack's watch, one of Sophia's shoes, and a pool of blood. Jack and Sophia were never seen again, and the building's owners took away the button for the 13th floor, so nobody would disappear there again. Ooh, spooky. But that was it. That was the final story on today's episode. You guys have to let me know what you thought about these stories. So if you want to head over to the YouTube channel or the Facebook page, you can leave your thoughts there. But thank you so much for listening. Feel free to drop me your own stories, like I said, on the email. I'd be absolutely honoured to read them out. If you could also give me a very short title or description in the subject, that would be amazing. And if you want to keep up with me as well, feel free to head on over to my Instagram, which is just at Alien Queen Meg. And that is all for this week. I'll catch you all in my next one. Stay spooky, guys.